Speak into the microphone, Mervyn. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last session of the second day of the first festival of something like that. I was going to do this really eloquent introduction, but yeah, that's not going to happen. Anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Mervyn. I'm the owner of the Book Lounge and the founder and festival director of Open Book. And thanks, and I'm just going to leave these. I'm done. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, a big thank you to everybody for coming out over the last couple of days. And a big thank you to you lot for seeing it through the whole day and being here in the last session of the day. I've got three absolutely wonderful writers with me for this session. In years gone by with the festival, I used to, not every year, but every now and then do something called Talking Turkey, which was just about me choosing three writers I wanted to just chat to. And hopefully other people would find it interesting, and if they didn't, well, tough shit. And then we had, because we always, when we're planning the festival, we send out the sort of proposed events to the different writers. We say, this is what we'd like you to do, this is who you'll be on stage with. Oops, sorry, didn't realize you didn't like that person, and all that kind of stuff. And in the last iteration of the festival, we kind of got a reply from somebody going, I'm not sure if you're talking about the animal turkey or with country turkey, but I don't know anything about either of them, so I don't know why I'm on. Anyway, so we thought we should call it something different, and yeah, I was in a bit of a sort of bad pun moment, so director's cut is what we are sitting with. I apologize for the name of this. But it is a very informal conversation with me talking to three people who I have got a huge amount of respect for. One of them I've known for a long, long time. One of them I've known for a middling period of time. And one of them I met, this morning, in fact, I think. 5 points to anybody who can work out which is which. Okay, I'm just going to briefly introduce them by waving their wonderful books around, and then we will work out what we're going to talk about. So this is The Heist Men, written by Andrew Brown. He's the guy that side. It's a very polite audience.
Yes, very polite.
Are you going to clap with every book that I pick up? Because there's quite a few here. Okay. Okay, excellent. A clappy or happy clappy or no. Okay. Heist Men is Andrew's new book, so when we do get to, when you stop clapping and we do get to actually talk about books, we're going to talk mostly about that. He's written 5 novels, 2 works of non-fiction, which have been kind of memoirs about his work as a police reservist, which was absolutely fascinating. They're all out of print, so you can't buy them, which really pisses me off. But anyway, except for Cold Sleep Lullaby, his second novel, which won the Sunday Times Fiction Award a long, long time ago. Mm-hmm. Thank you for not clapping. Sitting next to Andrew is Qarnita Loxton, but you're a well-read and intelligent audience, so you had worked that out for yourselves, I'm sure. Qarnita has written many colorful books, get them in the right order, starting with, this is what I call, I don't know if other people call this the friendship series, do they?
Yeah, people do call it, they call it the Being series.
The Being series. Yeah. I wonder how they get to that.
Yeah.
Okay. That would be Being Carrie, Being Shelley, Being Diane, Being Lily. I got that in the wrong order. Being Diane is the most recent one, and apparently it's the Being series. Okay, that's the technical term for that. I prefer to think of it as the friendship series, and I will explain why later. And then more recently, she wrote or co-wrote, she's a cohort of 4 writers, so Qarnita together with Amy Heinrich, Pamela Power, and Gail Schimmel, and yes, I was glancing at the cover to remember who she wrote it with, produced Chasing Marion under the pandemic. 4 people writing together. It sounds absolutely insane to me, so we're going to find out a little bit more about that a little bit later as well. And last, but by no means least, is what I think, I do read quite a lot, and what I think is the best debut novel that I've read for a long, long time. Certainly the best one I've read this year. The second verse by Onke Mazibuko sitting right next to me. He's also clapping for himself, which is awesome. Great. Did anybody actually clap for Qarnita?
I clapped for myself.
Okay. Excellent, much better. Okay, let's start with the odd one. Yes, that's
Of
you.
course.
That's you in the green.
Oh, yeah.
No, sorry, I'm not talking about Qarnita being odd. Chasing Marion. So, yeah, 4 people writing together.
Yeah.
Pandemic, you're under lockdown.
Yeah.
It's like you don't go and hang out like in a writer's circle. Apart from the fact 3 of them are in Joburg and you're in Cape Town. How? How? Why? What?
Yeah, it's crazy. We were depressed because of that pandemic. Oh, okay. Sit up straight.
You can slouch, but just speak into the microphone,
I'm
please.
sitting up straight, feet together, hands crossed, the whole thing. Middle of the stage. We were, me and Amy and Pamela and Gail.
Gail.
Yes, Gail.
Sorry, do
we
you
were,
want to just
we
hold
were,
it?
yes. We were going to meet Marion Keys when she came to do the festivals in 2020. Jesus, okay, it's a long day.
Yeah.
2020. And then she didn't come because everything got cancelled and we were depressed.
Did Marion Keys know that you were going to meet her?
Yes, we did. We stalked her, first of all, on Twitter, and we said we'd like to meet you, and she said, yes, I will meet you. And then, of course, we didn't. And so we were all 4 depressed, the 3 of them in Joburg, me in Cape Town, and everything was all bleak, and somebody had the idea, let's write a book together, and we did. We took 1 chapter at a time, each one had a turn. The story is basically 3 women and a man. They meet online through an online group, and they're fans of Marion Keys, and so how they get to meet her. So it's not so much about Marion Keys, actually, but it's about the process that they go as stalker fans to try and meet this woman who doesn't block them. So yeah, it was really something that we didn't expect to get published. We just did it for shits and giggles, and at the end we thought, oh, maybe somebody would be interested in it, and Pan Macmillan was, and it was great. We sent it to Marion Keys, and she loved it, actually. She didn't block us. She gave us a shout. She has actually been one of the biggest lessons on how to be a really generous supporter of other writers. So she's been very, very kind, very open, and it's been an unexpected upside of a pandemic, if there is even one.
Yeah, so for the cover is adorned with warm, funny, and moving. I loved it from Marion. Does everybody know who Marion Keys is, by the way? Okay. I don't know.
She's one of the writers you didn't invite to Open Book.
Yeah, I mean, Qarnita was being quite polite there. She's like,
I'll invite her.
Marion Keys was going to be coming to a festival in South Africa. She didn't mention Open Book for, obvious reasons. Yeah, anyway. But the kind of the process of the 4 of you, you sort of mapping this out.
We didn't map it out.
You didn't map it out.
We had a broad idea that we had these 4 people who would meet Marion Keys or not. And we played little tricks on each other. So every week the way that it worked is that each writer got a week to write a chapter and a character. And you had no idea what that character was going to do. So you could trick the next writer. I mean, a number of times they tried to sex traffic my character. It was insane. And so there was a lot of revenge writing also. So, oh, you did that to me. Because at one stage they tried to put my character in a porno. And I was like, no, you're not going to put me in a porno. And so I made that woman have sex with somebody in a toilet. You know, so it was that kind of revenge writing. It was really a lot of fun. We didn't think it was going to get published.
Wow. There's like so much of the plot that is starting to make sense to me. So Qarnita's, have we got any librarians in the audience? Okay, it's too late. Librarians have been working too hard today. So Qarnita's character is a librarian who. So she's in this kind of long distance relationship, and then this like basically porn video appears on social media, and it's like it's her character's name. It's in the library that she works. And then suddenly in the next chapter, it's like, no, actually, it wasn't her. It's like, Qarnita's like, yeah, I know what you wrote about me, but no, that wasn't me.
That's exactly how it happened.
Yeah, but it's a really, really entertaining book, which I was surprised at how well it actually works and hangs together. So I was seriously impressed. I still think you're slightly mad to have done it, but
I'll tell the others. They'll be happy.
Do that. Andrew, I want to move over to you. The Heist Men, fabulous novel, everything you expect from crime fiction. I hate kind of putting books into categories, but I mean, the cover of your book screams crime fiction. It's pacey, it's got great characters, it's got all those kind of tropes of crime fiction, but there's also a lot more to it. It's about Cape Town. It's about masculinity. It's about relationships. It's about kind of and Andrew brings himself as a writer with a very strong social conscience into the writing of the book in all sorts of weird, subtle, quite beautiful ways. So I think it's a fantastic piece of writing. I wanted to firstly just start. I was curious about why using the heist as the kind of the frame for this book, because it's not something that's been written that it's not an obvious trope in terms of crime.
I think two reasons. The one that intrigued me the most is the idea that it's a victimless crime. So the perpetrator, who's one of the main characters in the book, says, but this money that we're stealing doesn't belong to anyone. It's insured, it's on the way from a bank to an ATM or an ATM to a bank or wherever it's going. So no one actually owns it. It's no one's money. So why can't I take it? There's no victims in this. And of course it's nonsense. It's a self-justification. And he kind of knows that it is. But that's the way that he justifies it to himself. But it's a violent crime and people get hurt. Security guards get hurt, bystanders get hurt, and he needs to try and get to grips with that. It's a choice he's made. He's a career criminal. He's been pushed into that situation by his circumstances. He tried to go to law school and didn't have the funding and dropped out and ended up as a heist gang member. So that was the one reason. The other one is that the book is loosely based on the movie Heat. And what interested me about Heat was Pacino and De Niro. Pacino's the cop, De Niro's the heist man. Both strong characters, both very, very likable characters. And throughout that movie, I don't know if you know the movie, but throughout that movie, you're not sure who you want to succeed. And you'd be quite happy if De Niro, as the bad guy, succeeded, actually, because he's a bit of a romantic and he's trying to get out of this career as a criminal. He's trying to move on with his life, and this is his last heist. Pacino's a bit of a shit, frankly. Tough cop, shows no mercy. So I loved that about that movie. And in fact, they meet in a coffee shop without acknowledging their roles. They sit across from each other. And De Niro says, well, I do what I do. And Pacino says, well, I do what I do. And we'll see each other on the street. And you know from that moment one of them is going to die. And that's the kind of feeling I wanted to create in The Heist Men, is that you're not sure who you want to succeed. And although Eberhard February is a detective that I've had in 2 books before, I think people know me well enough that I'm quite happy to kill him off. So I was hoping that when people read through the book, they're not certain which way it's going to go.
And we'll try not to completely spoil it for those who haven't read it yet. That's very sad that you just said you've got no problems killing Edward Hawke. I mean, you know, you're creating problems for us. I mean, we care about the dude. But I just want to pick up on something that you were referring to. So Andile, who is the character that Andrew's just talking about, is one of the people in the heist gang, so one of the kind of perpetrators, if you like. Andrew opens the book with a chapter from Andile's perspective, so it's written. It's not in first person, but it's his perspective, and I felt that was an incredibly important choice. And going back to what you were just saying just now, I mean, my references are not film. I'm not well versed in film. But what came from me was Sifiso Mzobe's wonderful novel Youngblood from 10, 12 years ago. And the thing that Sifiso did, which I think is absolutely superb, and I think he was the first person to do in South African writing, South African crime fiction at the time, was that he presented the situation with, it was in that novel, it was about people who were carjackers, if that's the correct term. The question he was asking of the reader was, if you were living that life, if you were living in those conditions, would the decisions that you make be any different? Are you still sitting on your high horse through reading my book? And that was a very, very strong feeling that I had from the moment I picked this up.
It was a real challenge for me, and it's been a challenge throughout my writing. In fact, the first book I wrote was in Yenzi, and my editor said, when she edited in Yenzi, she said, "You're trying to present the perspectives of too many people. You've got to pick a character, and you've got to tell your story through their perspective." And so I've tried, and that's the traditional way of writing a novel. And what I tried to do in this book was to have the perspective of two people. And I enjoyed that enormously, because they can look at the same situation and you can tell the same story but from a different perspective. And that's great until they meet. And then it's not so easy. And that meeting in the coffee shop, I wrote it and rewrote it to try and work out how do you, having had both of their perspectives, can you now only have the perspective of one of them? Is the other one flat in the interaction? So from a writing perspective, I found it quite challenging. I loved it, I enjoyed it, but it took a lot of time to try and get that right.
Okay. And Onke, I'm going to come to you in a sec, but just also talking about that kind of process in a way, curveball question. We've spoken about, we do speak fairly regularly about your work and what you're working on. This wasn't the novel that I was expecting to be published under Andrew Brown's name this year.
Thanks, Mervyn. It was thrown under the bus squarely. There's a history to this.
I asked you last night.
No, you did.
You gave me permission.
This book wasn't the book that was going to be written. I've completed a manuscript. It's a much more challenging book for me. It's taken quite a long time to write. I think it could be really special if it ever sees the light of day, but it's going to need a lot of work. It's a book set in Gaza. It's fiction, and it tells the story of a retired Israeli detective and a Palestinian pathologist living in Gaza, and their collaboration to try and solve a crime involving a Jewish woman who has remained behind in Gaza. So as you can imagine, that's a fairly complicated story to tell. There's also a historical aspect to it, a historical story to it. It's the story of a young girl who lives in Iraq in the 1930s, when Iraq was an integrated Jewish and Arab country. And so she grows up in a predominantly Arab community, but she is Jewish and she follows Jewish practices, but she speaks Arabic. And this is all historically correct, I hope. I've done a lot of research on it. And with the resurgence of Zionism, and in fact Arab nationalism as well, the Jewish community eventually leaves Iraq and moves to what is going to be the new state of Israel. And it's that character, that young girl, who eventually ends up in Gaza and ends up being murdered in Gaza. But not murdered by who you think. So it's quite a challenging book to write. As I said, I think it could be really special. I gave the manuscript to my publisher, and I'm not sure exactly why, but there was some hesitancy about publishing it. I think it'll be controversial if it does come out. So I promised them an easy read crime thriller that they could actually sell sell easily. And so that's why the Heist Men was written. It was a payoff to get the green light on Gaza, and they've given the green light on Gaza, I'm delighted to say. They've given me a publisher, and it will see the light of day next year, hopefully. But it's going to need a lot of careful work to make it work, to make it the book that it could be. So I'm excited about it, but there's a long road ahead.
I'm very excited about it as well. Another reason for you to buy the Heist Men, so that
it
helps to pave the road for Andrew's next
Show
novel.
my publishers that it was a good idea.
Onke, you're still with us. Welcome.
Still here.
The second verse, as I said earlier, I think it's an absolutely fantastic novel. It is Andrew was talking about kind of having two characters playing off against each other. You've got a cast of wonderful characters, but this is essentially Bokang's story. In the book, which is not located in a very sort of specific point in time, which I think is interesting. We'll come back to that. Set in the Eastern Cape, Bokang is a teenager. He's in grade 11 and grade 12 in the course of the novel, and he has a lot of struggles. There are a lot of mental health issues. There's bullying at school, a addict, alcoholic father. Serious depression to the point where suicide is a very kind of present option. He keeps a suicide manifesto under his bed listing a bunch of different ways, potential different ways to kill himself. He has tried to do that. He spent time in an institution. This is like a 16-year-old kid. And yet, the book reads easily. It's got a light tone. You find yourself laughing, a book about serious mental health, and yet it's got this tone. I maybe shouldn't be making these comparisons, but again, what this brought to mind for me was a book that did astronomically well in the last couple of years. An Australian writer called Meg Mason did a novel called Sorrow and Bliss, also dealing with mental health, but in a very particular way, which I think is incredibly difficult to write. Because you need to be respectful of your character and their struggles, and of the reader's struggles and everything that they're bringing to it. But you really, really pulled it off. So firstly, congratulations. And secondly, tell us a little bit about the genesis of it and the kind of interaction between that tone and the heaviness of the issues.
Okay. I mean, it's quite remarkable to me that, when I get feedback on the book, because now that it's complete and I speak to people about it, I'm like, is that the book I intended to write? I tried a lot. In fact, in my head, I thought I fictionalized my life. So I thought I pulled myself out of it and created a world where it had nothing to do with me. And then I thought, okay, but it needs to be real emotion, so let me borrow some of my emotions. But the things that happen, I haven't necessarily been through them, but I've been in those situations. And then now, the more I talk about it, I realize, oh my goodness, I revealed so much without realizing it. And the interesting thing, though, is that the book, so I want to write horror books, and the book started off as a boy falls in love with a girl who's from a family of vampires. That's where the book started. Sorry to ruin it for you, but that's where it started.
Listen,
and then
there's no vampires.
There's no vampires.
I really love this book. This other shit that he's going to write. This one's great.
6 or 7 drafts later.
Vampire's gone.
The vampires were gone. Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a writing group where I was getting feedback. And
I can think of a few other writers who need to be part of that writing group.
The question was asked, what am I trying to do? Of all these many things I'm trying to do, what's the most important thing? And I thought, if I look at my own life, I used to speak about high school as the worst experience of my life. I didn't even like talking about those years. And because I'm now writing about a teenage protagonist, I'm thinking, what is it about that time that I didn't like writing about? Or didn't like thinking about. So I decided to sort of visit that place. Now, I like stand-up comedy because I think stand-up comedians are very intelligent. You've got to be clever to be able to deliver humor but handle serious topics. So when I was writing the book, I was thinking very much like a stand-up comedian. And I always think if people give you their attention, you owe them a laugh. So I wrote with that in mind when I was like, because I also get bored very quickly when I'm reading. So I'm like, how do I make sure that people stay engaged with this in a way that would make sense to me? And then also because it's quite a lonely process, that whole journey, I needed to do something to keep myself engaged. So I was like, how can I make myself laugh? If I laugh at this, I'm sure there are people that can laugh at this. But the interesting thing for me was that when I set out to write the book, I had this idea that I'm trying to have a conversation with a younger version of myself. So as much as it has a teenage protagonist, I wasn't trying to write a story for young people. I was trying to create dialogue between an adult and a younger version of themselves. And in that process, it started making me ask a lot of questions, you know, like, okay, I've written about a depressed protagonist. Was I depressed in high school? And I was like, well, I don't think it was available for me to be depressed. But when I'm a psychologist now, I can analyze what I've been through. And I think, yeah, of course I was. But I didn't realize it at the time because it just wasn't spoken about. And, you know, certainly in the places I've lived and where I come from, it wasn't something that was available for you to say, that's what I have, you know, or seek the right channels of help for it, you know.
It's what that absence of language.
Yeah, yeah. So even now that the book's complete, it feels like a dialogue that's ongoing because I'm interested a lot in what people have to say about what's written there. And I think I've been most humbled by people tapping into their own personal experiences and saying, you captured that so well, you know. And I'm thinking, I'm just writing about something that I've never told anyone about and I didn't plan to. I was just creating fiction and other things, but it's those real experiences in the book that people say, I can see. Someone today, earlier on, when I read, I think 2 books, in the last session, I read 2 pages from the book. And the panelist who was sitting next to me said, gosh, you were speaking about my partner. And I was like, I don't even know your partner, but you know, she could identify on behalf of her partner in terms of what was happening on those pages. So, yeah.
Your book is also, in a lot of ways, I think about masculinity and a lot of the difficulties and struggles around that and around gender in South Africa. You mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned now something about schools, and I made a note of the line that line that stayed with me. Bullying, so this is in reflection, in reference to the high school experience. Bullying is not a word here, it's a way of life. And I found that's incredibly profound, and it also made me think of a book called Brutal School Ties, which came out a couple of years ago, which Sam Cowan wrote, about Parktown boys, I think it was. And the extent to which and that book and also reading your book made me, it almost felt like it made me understand a little bit more about who wants to frame it as toxic masculinity, the crisis of masculinity, the ways in which institutions are playing out and what they are doing on young boys on their journey to manhood. And it's almost like it felt like this missing explanatory factor for me. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think part of the reason why I didn't enjoy high school so much is because I went to an all-boys school. And I just found that environment really difficult. But the strange thing is that there's so many things about it that I loved. And at the time, as a young boy growing into a man, I felt like I wouldn't change it for anything. Like, I love this, I love the sports, I love the camaraderie, but there were just smaller things that happened that weren't spoken about. And years later, when I started understanding myself as someone who is more expressive in a different way, I felt that the environment was just, it didn't allow for me to be myself. I spent more time conforming rather than expressing who I really am. And a lot of the things I learned there, I felt like I'm still trying to unlearn now. And I had to be selective about the people that I'm around. 3 years ago, I went to my 20-year reunion back at the school. I trying to figure out how old I am.
Yeah, I was going to say, so
I'm not in my 20s.
You're not 25.
No. No. So I went back to that high school reunion. It was Founders Day, and I was horrified to see Founders Day. It was like 1942 there, but it was like 3 years ago. And I was like, it's still the same as it was when I was 18, you know. But when I was around the people that I was in grade 12 with, it was interesting to find when we all together, everyone's talking like they were 18, you know. But these are married men now, You know, so and that's what happens just by being around a certain crowd. It easily comes out of you. So I felt like I had never had an opportunity to talk about it until I started writing the book. And it's interesting now to have people that I went to school with who have read the book saying, wow, you actually captured something here that we never actually thought about. And then on the other side, the flip side is that I'm Xhosa speaking, so I got initiated as a Xhosa man. And in the Eastern Cape, there's that whole pressure around initiation into manhood. And I was born in KZN, but then obviously my parents are both Xhosa, but so there was an expectation that I'm gonna have to go through the whole initiation thing. And I think if you're a young teenage boy in the Eastern Cape and you're Xhosa, there's no option of am I gonna go or not gonna go. You just know that you're gonna go through it. So, I mean, I was looking forward to it from a peer perspective that this is something I need to go through. But there's a lot of questions I had about the experience, especially when I was there, and now considering the influences in my life and how I got to the point where I am. I mean, I was sent to boarding school at 5 and stayed there for 8 years, you know. So I grew up speaking English from a very young age. But when I then got to high school, you find yourself in situations where this side is saying you're not black enough, and this side is saying, well, you're not white by no stretch of the imagination, you know, and then you find yourself caught in the middle. So even in terms of discussions around masculinity and manhood, when I look at myself as a Xhosa man, I'm like, contextually with where I am, what does that look like to when my father was becoming a man? It can't be the same thing because we grew up in very different circumstances. So the character in the book, I think, questions those things, and it's rough for him in the book because his father, the only male role model he has is an alcoholic father who he worships, but is also the antagonist in the book, the person that he hates the most. But, you know,
It's his father.
But it's his father, and what do you do?
Qarnita, I want to talk to you a little bit, or have you talk a little bit about before Chasing Marion, so what you refer to as the Being series.
My publisher thanks you.
Better known as the Friendship series. So what you do absolutely brilliantly, and I've said this to you a number of times before, is that you write these books in an incredibly accessible, readable, I hate the word readable, sorry, accessible, Moorish way. You kind of start and you just can't put them down. The books just, they grab you and you just sail along. And at the same time, you use each one of them to explore some very, very serious issues. And there's almost like a different sort of theme. And the series revolves around these 4 very close friends. So each one of them is the subject of a different book in the series. And the most recent one being Diane, the kind of the issues or thematic stuff that happens there is around sexuality and sexual orientation, which was a bit of a slight leap from the previous books. And I was just wondering about, firstly, the reason for choosing that for Diane, that set of issues. And also, I'm wondering whether that links up a little bit with what Onke was saying now about writing, not necessarily consciously, not writing to a particular audience, but a relationship that then happens with certain readers, as Onke was talking about in terms of high school people, and how that plays out for you with some of your readers and your peers, and whether you feel like you're writing to them in a way.
Sure, that's a difficult question. I think with each of the books and each of the characters have got different flavors and different issues, crises that they face. And I think that it is true to say that I don't write in a vacuum. You write from the life experiences and the kind of things that interest you. And so each of the characters have had that. I mean, Carrie started off around religious identity. Shelley was woman going through a midlife crisis. I'm not speaking too loudly about that. Lily was also about this whole happy ever after, or when you get married, so they each have their own flavors. And I guess they are things that I've experienced in my life, not necessarily in the same way, I guess in the same way that you were saying, you kind of use some of your experiences and take it out, and then afterwards you think, oh shit, that actually revealed more than I intended to. And with Diane, I think in some ways I was writing to a particular audience. I am a parent, and it was triggered by just being on a WhatsApp group, first of all. These school WhatsApp groups where people just talk about their children and all kinds of random stuff comes out. And my son is in high school, and there was a conversation around the teenagers shouldn't be allowed to speak by themselves about certain things that are not appropriate. And one of the issues that came up was around sexual orientation. And that, he was quite a young teenager at the time. But I saw this kind of 50 WhatsApps in, and I was horrified because how can we not allow our children to talk about these things? Or to talk about everything, not just any one particular thing. But then also to kind of step behind the stereotype about you're assuming all the parents are the same. And the theme that goes through all of my books is to allow individuality. So the whole being thing is not just because I was looking for something to call a being series, but it's about being yourself, being authentic, being who you are. And part of Diane was that she's the kind of woman that you see in the mall. She just looks ordinary like everyone else. But to look behind that and to not make assumptions about her sexuality and about the sexuality of her teenage daughter. So it's kind of a long way of saying that for my own life, I wanted to live authentically and to be who I am and to cut through all the layers of religious identity, sexual identity, being a mother, all of those kind of things. And so for me, Diane wasn't really such a big leap because the core of it is the same message that's in the rest of the books, is that live authentically, be who you are, be brave, speak out. And that's so when you asked whether I was writing to a readership, I guess in that sense I was writing to a readership. I was writing to this WhatsApp group to say, don't make assumptions about your children, don't make assumptions about the other people that you are talking to. So instead of just replying on the WhatsApp, I wrote the whole book.
And the other thing that's one of the many other things that you did with Being Diane, which I think is really important and also really impressed me, was the way you brought the book lounge into your novel. It's something.
Genius.
It's something that some writers do, and when they do it well, it helps. It helps with their sales and positioning in the store. And I'm just saying. Andrew in the Heist Men mentions Ob's books, which is fine. I've got no problem with that. We've done quite well with his book. Could do better. Just saying. Andrew, in terms of masculinity, because I think that's also something which was really very present for me in particularly, in both the main characters actually. So with Edward, I think you have a lot of fun with Edward February, and also in the relationship between him and
Valencia.
I would have remembered her name, but thanks.
Just helping you along.
It's not Real Madrid, it's not Barcelona, it's Valencia. And who's gay and plays a very particular kind of probing, taking the piss out of Edward kind of role, but also allows him to kind of explore his masculinity, and that happens in a very, very interesting way, I think, in this book. And it's also contrasted with Andile, who at some point there's a line there which is around sort of what is expected of him, and the kind of performative masculinity that he's kind of struggling with. And I was just, I was wondering about that and the presence for that for you in writing the book.
I'm going to do a P.W. Botha on you. That's a great question, but I'm going to answer another one. Do you remember him doing that? I like that question, but let me tell you this.
Oh, okay. So did you just compare yourself to P.W. Botha?
No, just what Onke and Qarnita was saying, what you were saying to them, I just really resonated with me, and that's about dealing with serious issues with humor. So when I was growing up, I was an avid reader, and I always wanted to be a writer. But because I was, 18 and terribly serious, I'd read The Russians. And it's quite dreary, it's quite barren, it's very serious, there's not much humor. And I assumed great writing looked like that. And then I read, funnily enough, I read Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities. And I just thought, oh, you can deal with quite serious issues of power and masculinity and the American society at that time, but you can make it funny. And you can get your message across. It has to be done deftly and carefully, but you can get your message across with humor. And I mean, that's what we're hearing now. And I was talking about it with friends earlier, that humor is so important. A lightness of touch is so important. No matter how serious the issue is that you're dealing with. And, both Onke and Qarnita have clearly done that, and I tried to do that in Heist Men, and I even tried to do that in Devil's Harvest, which is a very serious book set in South Sudan about the traumas of South Sudan, but still to try and lighten it at times. Okay, I will answer your question about masculinity too. Masculinity, for me in the Heist Men, was really me exploring quite an intriguing aspect of my life, and that is working as a cop. So traditionally the police service is very male, very masculine, very testosterone, very one-dimensional in that way. I don't know about other police forces, but the South African police force is, in fact, my experience of it is so different to that. And it's intriguing to me that it's that different, that it is so accepting of difference. So Valencia is based on a real character, and the moment my colleagues in the police force read the first chapter, they said, okay, you've based some of it on her. She was my sergeant at Mowbray, who is adored and revered and respected by everyone. But is that Valencia character? She's a cockmarker. She's out there and she's challenging men and the way men behave in the most direct kind of way. And I really enjoyed putting her into the book because of that. Because then she can challenge Eberhard, and without ever meeting Andile, she can challenge Andile too, who are both men who have grown up in a particular environment and are now having to rethink how they relate to women, how they relate to other men, how they relate to the world, when they are both in career choices that are traditionally male and testosterone based. So it was an interesting process for me. I'm old school. I came through the 80s. We went through some very hard times in the 80s, where as a man I was told that male heterosexuality is violent. And as an 18-year-old who was just starting to explore sexuality and heterosexuality and gayness and everything that was out there, to be told that was a very confusing and difficult thing. And I think that's what you see in Andile as well. And I think that sounds like what you maybe see in Onke's characters as well, is that your sexuality at that age is so fragile. You don't even know what it is, and it can be influenced, it can be injured, it can be confused so easily by others doing what they're doing on the WhatsApp group and telling you that's okay, that's not okay, you are this, you are not that, one thing or another, and not allowing you to explore yourself in a way that is safe and protected and understood by those around you. So there's some of the issues that I was trying to explore in the book.
You've pointed out that all three of you use a lot of humor, and you're absolutely right, and it is something that you all got in common, which I didn't think of. If I had thought, I would have called this panel Funny People or something like that. But yeah, thank you for that. Onke, you've spoken about how your novel, it is fiction, but there is stuff drawn from your life. How do you see yourself now in relation to this book? Do you see and I'm thinking in terms of identity, do you see yourself as a psychologist who has written a book? Or do you see yourself as a writer with more to come? And how does Onke the writer, Onke the psychologist, how do they interact? Where's this going?
I think
and there's a right answer, okay? The right answer involves more books, but with no fucking vampires, okay?
well, I'll say this. Up until October last year, I was working for Transnet. And I worked...
So you're working for?
Transnet. I quit my full-time job to write. So, yeah, the psychology is paying the bills.
Okay.
But no, I've been a psychologist probably 13, 14 years now. But I was working in a company. I was working at Transnet for 12 of those years. And I only went into private practice last year.
Okay.
But I do feel that the writing is bringing together almost everything that I've always been in my life. So throughout my life, I always had this thing where it felt like the creative in me is fighting the academic. In high school, I knew I wanted to do fine arts afterwards, but my mother was not having any of that and said, use your brain to get a real degree. So I went to do quantity surveying at UCT, lasted a year and a half, dropped out to become a rapper. Okay. Did that for 18 months and then got tired of that, went to work in a bank, and while working there, I realized I like helping people. So then I started I went back to school formally to study psychology, just in case this, creative thing didn't work.
Okay.
But throughout my life, even when I finished the psychology and when I was working, I always had to have something on the side. So I was always, even now I still make the music, but it's for me, it's not for public consumption. It's for me just as a creative outlet. And then a few years ago, I was doing a PhD in psychology, and I suddenly realized that I've got 2 master's degrees, I'm doing this PhD, and it still feels like I'm doing it for other people. And now I don't have to explain myself to anyone. So then I thought, to prove a point, I'm going to drop out of this PhD to go write a book. And then the book, 4 years later, the book is getting published, and now I'm back in a PhD, but this time it's in creative writing. And it feels like
much better.
Everything. So the writing for me feels like, life experience, research, whatever I used to pass those degrees, work ethic, personality, abilities, all coming together in this writing thing. And it just feels like, for once, that battle between academic and creative is not a battle anymore. It's like all coming out in the right way through. Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah,
That's
so
very cool.
I think the writing is not going to stop. I can't stop. I think I have a lot of manuscripts that I finish and then then they sit there. And then, they're not all going out there. It's just now that the bug is bitten, I seem to not be able to stop. So, yeah.
Cool. Oh, shit, the time. Okay, I'll have to open up for questions. Quickly, Qarnita, on the same topic in terms of identity. You are Does one talk about the fact that you're a lawyer in the past tense? Do we go, you were a lawyer, or
I worked as a lawyer.
You
That's-
are a
that's
lawyer
the
who
most-
doesn't practice as a lawyer?
Yes.
That's what we say. Okay.
Yes, okay.
Is that's a part of your life that you just put behind?
I think what
and
Onke
your
said
writing
now
is separate. Okay.
resonates so much with me because, I also just fell into law after university because kind of the subjects that you like doing and you need to have a real degree and something that's going to make some money and make your parents happy. And I was first generation of our family to go to university. So you have to do something real. And that's what I did. And I worked as a lawyer for 15 years. But there was also always the feeling of something's missing. And in that time, you grow as a person. I got married, I got divorced, I had children, I had stepchildren, the whole thing. And so writing for me has also, in a way, been a coming home. My first book was published, I think I was 42, 41. And it took me a whole lifetime. It took me a lifetime to get to the point where it all sort of came together. And now law, I'm grateful to the career that it had. It made me money, it gave me life experience, it got me out there, met my partner, then I met my other partner. But
Is this all together over one day?
How long did this take?
Couple years. But so I think in terms of identity, it's taught me, and it's what comes out in my books, I think also, and why it's so important to me, is that we are not just one thing. And so to embrace all the different aspects of who I am, who my characters are, it's to recognize that it all comes from different places, and it's okay not to have one label. And so writing for me has also been a place that I come home to, but I do still struggle to say that I'm a writer, because I think we are all more than just one thing.
But there are also a lot of people who are not writers. So you can also own it. And there are a lot of people who've written books who are not writers. I can promise you that. Okay, I need to open it up. I mean, just to finish that triangle, for those of you who don't know, Andrew is either an attorney or an advocate, one of those law things. Writes in his spare time. He's also a police reservist, which he was talking about that as though that was his career. It's not. It's on the side. So there's also a lot of sort of what I'm getting from this is that it's okay for me to run a bookshop and a literary festival. I have all these amazing different things in my life. Yeah.
Mervyn, being 20, I can still work out where I'm going. Still have lots of time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? Because I can carry on for a while. 7 minutes, apparently. Okay, we've got a mic coming.
So firstly, I'm in love with all four of you.
Thank you on behalf of all four of us.
Okay, and
I'm
I've
not
come
feeling at
out
all
of a
awkward.
session where Gertrude Festu, who's sitting next to me, who I'd like to celebrate, was reflecting some of the gender issues and the women's struggles of the 80s and beyond. So my question is about masculinity and hashtag men are trash. Let's start there. But to ask about these rites of passage of men, including, the Xhosa circumcision rites and going to the bush and everything, how can we use those for progressive masculinity ends? In other words, some of the women that Gertrude spoke about in earlier sessions, like Mama Zishlangu and Dorothy Mfako, and how can we insert progressive content into those masculine rites of passage?
Interesting question.
Is it coming at me?
I think it is.
For sure.
Okay.
It's for you.
I think in my experience, they certainly, in the environments I've been at, whether it's at an all-boys school or family, culturally, there has to be a willingness to engage in discussion, as I mentioned earlier on, to sort of contextualize it. So when I look at my schooling, I found it interesting that I was in an all-boys environment, but we never had discussions about masculinity or discussions of manhood. And then even after that, in my friendship circle, it was largely males, and whenever we all had problems, whether it was from home or personal relationships or with the law or whatever it was, we'd get together as friends, but you don't discuss what you're running from. You create the space as if it's safe here, and then nothing really gets discussed in that space, and then only years later or a while later you start to realize, but it's actually stopping me discussing on what the real things are, so it's not as helpful as you think. So in my head, I always think, there needs to be more discussions. in terms of what does masculinity look like now. And don't get me wrong, especially from when I speak about traditionally as a Xhosa man, I'm not saying the whole thing I had an issue with it. I didn't. I think from a family perspective, connecting with my ancestral lineage and understanding myself in that context, there's a lot I got out of it. And there was a lot of men who came there to talk about manhood, and I just became selective about what I take. And it's done differently in different places. There's some places where it is a school where these things are discussed in a certain context, but I do think there is room to incorporate, okay, once you leave here and you go elsewhere, what does that manhood look like in that outside context, you know? When I look at my background, I think I've been fortunate to have gone to very good schools. So when I went through the initiation thing, I was 20 years old, and I was sitting in a rural area, and the men that were coming to look after me and talk to me were either unemployed or working as laborers. So now in my context of manhood, in terms of taking care of your supposed kingdom and all of that, I'm looking at them with a very different lens. And I would ask these questions, and there wasn't a willingness to get into to engage in discussion. It would be, stop coming here with your Western ways, or stop coming with your clever ways, or whatever it is. You know, and it was the same in high school. Every time I heard the word tradition, I'd roll my eyes, because you'd ask a question, why can't this happen? Tradition. Why tradition? What is this tradition? Why can't it, whose tradition? Why can't it be looked at? So I think engaging in conversation and just examining those practices and contextualizing them. Yeah.
Qarnita, as a mother of boys, of sons, mother of boys, yeah. How do you think about this stuff?
Oh, it's really, really hard. I've got a stepson who's 27, and then I've got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. And they're in various stages of engagement. Some talk too much, some talk not at all. But it is something that I struggle with as a mother, as a woman, how to engage with boys. And I see more and more actually how much emphasis they have on their father. That is their connection. Or that is their role model in so many ways. I mean, it's such an overused word, but if they are going to talk, they do want to talk to their father firstly and then to me. It's just personally how it has happened in our house. And I think about it often, and I struggle with how to deal with it. And I think the key is, as Onke says, is in the willingness to engage and in the, it is in the willingness to talk to them. So I am there to talk to them, but their father is also there to talk to them. It's not in one particular conversation. I think it's an ongoing willingness, openness. Also sometimes the ability to say to these boys that I don't know, I'm trying to find out. We learn as we go on.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very good answer, but it's the best I could do.
No, it's real.
Yeah.
It's real.
Yeah. I do, if you'd like to hear.
Yeah, let Andrew go.
I'm married into a Jewish family and remained married for 28 years. I have two boys, and they both went through bar mitzvahs. I have a daughter, she went through a bat mitzvah. I knew nothing about Jewish tradition when I married. I learned as I went along. I knew nothing about this rite of passage that was a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, and I was very hopeful for what it might mean and the platform, the opportunity that it might provide, particularly for my boys as a rite of passage. And I have to say I was very disappointed with what it turned out to be. The responsibility for talking about sensitive issues about manhood fell on me as their father. The institution that I had assumed would step up and somehow engage in that was not interested in that issue at all. Their understanding of what the rite of passage was so far removed from what my understanding was that there was really no connect at all. And I don't know how you change that. I don't know how you change an entire institution and the way that it sees these things. But it was disappointing to me that I didn't feel I had any support from the institution in dealing with what seemed like a really good opportunity to talk to a 13-year-old boy about all kinds of important things.
Just want to start with an apology to Andrew and Basti, who have heard me ask 3 questions this weekend already. One of the things that, having come to Open Book for years, one of the things that every South African author at some point kind of makes a complaint about is that sense of like that writing has to be a passion because it has to be done on top of the thing that makes money or the way you're involved in society. And we all know that. It's just, but it is something we can do and come together for. But also, I've learned recently it's not new, like Charles Dickens and Dostoevsky were permanently broke, you know.
Yeah.
But a very similar question to the one I asked yesterday, but is writing a form of detachment from that like real life in the economy, or is it like a different new way of engaging with life or that kind of thing? In other words, is writing purely an escape from professional life, or is it another form of life entirely, or is it both, you know, that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Sure. I don't think I'm going to answer that question.
Well, we're all looking to you.
I see you all staring at me.
The voice of experience.
Yeah, but you see, it's not fair. It's not fair because I don't see myself as a writer. I don't define myself as an author, and I never have. And frankly, when Cold Sleep Lullaby I did really well, I was a bit shocked and didn't quite know how to redefine myself. So I suppose what Qarnita was saying, that we're a lot of different things. I see myself as a lot of different things and not one thing, and certainly not as a writer who's supporting my addiction by working. But on the other hand, I couldn't imagine not writing. So I'm kind of stuck in that relationship of working and having to write. Why I have to write? I'm writing for myself largely. I enjoy it. I enjoy the journey. I enjoy the investigation of my own feelings. And then, of course, Mervyn invites you to Open Book, and it's all
You say yes.
just beautiful.
Oh, don't get started on the fucking wine. There's an issue. We are kind of out of time. I'm going to take one last question. There was a hand around that side somewhere. Who? Helena, was it you? No? Somebody? Going.
Can I respond to that question?
You have to.
Well, while the mic's
You've got a
moving-
very pushy panel here. Yeah.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say for me, it almost feels like if I don't write, then the stories start to haunt me since I've started writing. And in that sense, in the way I speak about the whole manhood journey and what that whole initiation thing did for me, was it really connected me to my father who passed away a while ago. And not that I sit and hear his voice, no I don't, but it does feel in many ways like I'm doing something which, with the time when he passed on, he was an academic writer, but he was going to start doing fiction things, which he didn't ever get to do. So it almost feels in many ways like it's a continuation of something that has been happening in my family. So as someone who's a healthcare professional, the writing thing also feels like a form of healing, like telling stories, you know, and getting people to relate. And that's where I'm getting a big wake-up call that I keep going on, that I want to be a horror writer, but I told a human story. And now when I'm thinking about the next book, I realize I've got other stories to share, which could be healing for people somewhere out there, you know. So it's like, okay, put this horror stuff in a box and put it away.
The vampire trilogy is going to wait for a while.
Yeah.
But writing is both. You have to do it. You do it because you're passionate. Because otherwise, why would you? Why would you put yourself through it? And then it is a whole different life. So it's both the things that you said. It's not one or the other. And also, you get to come to Open Book.
For most of my life, I've been made to feel like I show up, but not 100%. I do things half-measured. Writing's the first thing that makes me feel like I show up full-time with everything.
Sure.
Yeah. And it doesn't even feel like work, so it's like, okay. So.
Brilliant.
Okay, that is a fabulous note to end on. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening, everybody who has joined us over the last couple of days. It has been a very, very special 2 days, and tomorrow is going to bring some more. To do a quick little ad, 2 of the people on the stage here with me, Qarnita and Onke, are going to be joining me in Writer Sports at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We're going to finish off the festival with that.
It's so awful. Writer sports is the most awful thing you can do on the stage. It's the most fun to be in the audience.
Qarnita, Onke hasn't
I've
done
been
it
told it's
before.
fun.
Can you
Onke was told it's the
please-
greatest
I've been
thing.
told it's
Yeah, he was
It's
told it's
awful.
fun.
Wear loose
They
fitting
lied,
clothes.
Onke,
It's
they lied.
it's a fabulous, wondrul event for the people sitting that side, for the guys this side. I don't know why people keep saying yes. I mean, Qarnita's done it before, and she said yes. Anyway, I'm going to stop
It's so
rambling.
hard.
Listen, what I really do want to end off with, and what I want to say, which is really important and serious and genuine and all that stuff, is that these are three absolutely wonderful writers, extremely talented. I love their work, and I am actually a critical reader. They really are good at what they do, and I'm not going to pick up all those books again because I'm tired. But please give them some real love. Thank you.
Can I clap for myself?
We're allowed to clap for ourselves now.
And I think our thanks to Mervyn for getting this show back on the road.